Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Hey, Daf 55 of Masechta Yoma. Daf 55 talks about the sprinkling of the blood inside the Kodesh Kodashim, the blood of the cow, the blood of the goat, and we discussed the counting of the sprinkling. Right? Achas ve'achas, achas ve'shtayim. That's again. Then we get into a sugya which is touches upon other sugyas that we have learned along the along our journey so far. Some gemaras from Shkalim, as well as segueing into a gemara that we learned in Eruvin a long time ago. Although the truth is, we're really only going to get to that tomorrow. Let us begin on Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom on the final line of the page. Natos Adam, Mimishim Marizba v'chulei. So of course, the Kohen Gadol, after he is done with the Ketores, he goes out to the Azareh and he takes the blood of the cow that a Kohen has been keeping moving so that it doesn't congeal. And then it says, "My kimatzlif," right? So that then he would go into the Kodesh HaKodashim with this blood, and he would sprinkle it on the Aron. And we're going to see it's not on the Aron; it's near the Aron. It's before the Aron, and it says kimatzlif. Mochi Rav Yehuda kimangadna. So what's kimatzlif? So nobody really has an exact translation. However, what it means is, well, says Rav Yehuda, he demonstrates that it's as though you're giving lashes to a fellow. If you're giving lashes to a fellow, so you lash him like in the shoulders, and then you go lower down the back. You don't administer a lash in the same place twice in a row. So you go lower down. So here also, by the that's what the Kohen Gadol did with the blood. He would kind of sprinkle it a little bit higher, a little bit lower, a little bit lower. So Tana, we learn in a brisa, Kshumaze Enomaza ala kaporis, ele kineged ovia shel kaporis. When the Kohen Gadol is sprinkling the blood, he doesn't sprinkle the blood mamish on the kaporis. The blood doesn't hit the aron. Rather, he sprinkles the blood sort of on the same level of the kaporis, of the lid of the aron. Meaning, so you wouldn't sprinkle the blood on top of the aron, you would sprinkle it in front of the aron. It wouldn't actually touch it, but it was parallel, on the same level, the same height as the width, as the thickness of the parochet, the kaporis, the lid of the aron. Kishu mazet lemala. So, right, so of course the sprinkling, there was one above and 7 below. So when he would sprinkle above, mitzad yadu lemata, so his hand would be below, and so his hand would be like facing down. He would like sprinkle upwards. Uchshumaze lemata, and when he would sprinkle below, mitzad yada lemala, so then his hand was facing upwards, and he would sprinkle downwards. Sounds fun. Minani mile, how do we know this? So how do we know that he wouldn't sprinkle the blood on the aron? How do we know that the blood would not actually touch the aron? Rather, it would fall on the floor in front of the aron. So Amr Acha bar Yaakov, Amr Zera, Amr Kra, Visa also ala kaporis, Vilifne kaporis. All right, you hear that, friends? It says Visa also ala kaporis, so sprinkle the blood. Now this pasuk is in the context of the goat, okay? The Seir Achata Sasher La'am, the Seir La Hashem. So he will sprinkle the blood. So it says on the kaporis. So that seems to imply like it'll touch. Kilu pashit, the blood will land on the kaporis. Vilifnei kaporis, as well as in front of the kaporis. Now that's reference to the what we refer to as the 7 limata, the sheva limata, the sprinkling of the 7 times below. Now lifnei kaporis is certainly not touching the kaporis; it's in front of the kaporis. Okay, so lo yomar limata b'sar. So now the Gemara points out that really by the goat, it doesn't need to say that you sprinkle it 7 times below. Dilo tzarich. the gomer mimata depar. Because after all, the pasuk by the goat says, V'asa es damo kasha also damapar. By the goat, the pasuk says that he does with the goat the same, just like he does with the cow. And therefore, if by the cow he's sprinkling it 7 times below, so by the goat he's going to do the same thing, and therefore we don't need the pasuk to explicitly tell us that by the goat, visa also right lifnei kaporis. We don't need the pasuk to tell us that by the goat he sprinkles it 7 times, because the pasuk says that you do the goat the same way you do the cow. And memele, the cow you do 7 times, so the goat you also do 7 times below. So lama nema. So then how come the pasuk tells us by the goat that you sprinkle the blood 7 times lamata, 7 times below? La kushe al lilifne. The reason why the pasuk writes that you sprinkle the blood of the goat 7 times below, even though it doesn't need to, is so that we can learn something about the one time that you sprinkle it above. Right? There's the achas l'ma'ala v'sheva l'mata, and we didn't need to write the sheva l'mata, the 7 below. The reason why they are written is to teach us something about the achas l'ma'ala, to teach us something about the one application above by the goat. Ma'lifnei dilav al, af al dilav al. So just like when you sprinkle the blood limata, it's lifnei kaporis, it's in front of the kaporis. It's not actually touching the aron, it's going to land on the floor. So also, when he sprinkles it above, it doesn't literally mean on the aron, on the kaporis, it means in front of, i.e. it falls on the floor, it doesn't actually come into contact with the aron. Okay. Adrab, the Gemara suggests that maybe the opposite is true. Lo yomer lemala bipar. That maybe when it comes to the cow, I don't need it to tell me that you sprinkle the blood once above. Just skip that. Because the lotzarich the gomer mimayla desayir. Because we already know that, as we saw earlier, right? We know that the cow and the goat have the same instructions in terms of their blood. And therefore, if by the goat it says clearly that you'll sprinkle it once above, so I don't need it to say that by the cow that you sprinkle it once above, because memele, if you sprinkle the blood of the goat once above, so you sprinkle the blood of the cow once above. So then, how come it says that you sprinkle the blood of the cow once above? So lama nemar la'akushe lifnei le'al. So I'll suggest that the reason why it says that you sprinkle the blood of the cow above is to compare the 7 sprinklings of the cow below, which does need to be written, because that's where we learn out that it's 7 times. So we do need it to be written that we sprinkle the blood of the cow 7 times below. And I'll argue that the reason why it says that we also sprinkle the blood of the cow once above is so that we'll compare the 7 below to the ones above and say, Ma'al al mamish al af lifnei al mamish. Okay. To make the argument that the reason why the pasuk writes that we sprinkle the blood once above for the cow is because even though we don't need it to say it, it's there in order to teach us that we compare the 7 below by the cow to the one above by the cow, and say that what does it mean, al? It means mamish al. It means mamish that you sprinkle the blood on the kaporis, that it should come into contact with the kaporis. And then we'll apply that to the goat and say that also by the goat it comes into contact with the kaporis, right? So we have 2 things that we can argue that are extra, right? By the sa'ir, by the goat, it doesn't need to say that you sprinkle the blood below, because we learn that memele from the cow. It does have to say that we sprinkle it once above, because that's how we learned that it's once above, because it says oso, fine, seder. And when it comes to the cow, there's something extra, which is that you sprinkle it once above by the cow. It needs to say that you sprinkle 7 below, because that's how we learn 7, the number of 7 for below. But it doesn't need to teach the one above. So so therefore we have 2 options. We can say, well, we have this extra 7 below by the goat, and that would teach us that just like those are not actually coming into contact with the aron, therefore also the one above by the goat doesn't come into contact with the aron either. And then we can learn the cow from there and say that none of them come into contact with the aron. Or we can make the argument, which is that no, let's learn out from the extra by the cow, that we say that you sprinkle it once above, even though it doesn't need to teach that, because we already know that if we compare it to the goat, and the goat has one above, so memele, the cow is one above, so what's the chiddush over there? So let's argue that the chiddush over there is to teach that just like the one above, it says I'll argue that it means it actually does come into contact, and therefore also the 7 below by the cow also come into contact. And then memele, we can learn it out to the goat and say that those also mamish come into contact. So which one is it? Does it come into contact or doesn't it come into contact? So hi mai, what do we do, Chaver? What do we do? I amart bishlama lemata desar lakushe lemaila. No, lakushe. So the Gemara says, look, so if we have to pick, are we going to learn out from the one above of the cow or from the 7 below of the goat? Says the Gemara, I'd prefer to choose the 7 below of the goat, to say that just like those are lifnei and not actually touching the aron, so also the one above is not actually touching the aron. Because in that case, l'mayla depar mibayile lichdetana dver Eliezer ben Yaakov. Because if I learned something out from the 7 below of the goat, and then I still have the extra one above by the cow, I have something to do with that. Because we have a brisa that learns out something from the one above of the cow. Titana, as we learn in the brisa, dver Eliezer ben Yaakov, al pnei kaporis kedma, that when the pasuk says by the cow, al pnei kaporis kedma, that you sprinkle from the blood on the kapores, on the eastern side, zebana of, this serves as like a father, as a precedent, that kol makom shenemar pnei eno ela kadimne, because it says al pnei kapores kedma, on the face of the kapores on the east. We learn out from there that every time that it says pnei, every time that it says the face, it's to the east. And therefore, we have something that we can learn out, something different that we can learn out from the one above. And therefore, what do we do with the 7 below, meaning the one above the cow? So what do we do with the 7 below of the goat? We can learn it to teach that all these sprinklings are not actually coming into contact with the aron, but rather falling on the ground before then. But if you're going to insist that no, we're learning out from the extra one above by the cow to teach that a mamish comes into contact, well then what do you do with the extra 7 below by the goat? Haha. The Gemara says, I got you there. And therefore, it must be that we're learning out from the extra 7 below by the goat, and the extra 1 above by the cow is for the teaching of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that every time it says Pnei, it means to the east. Amazing. Givaldig. Tonu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught v'iza also ala kapores v'lifnei kapores. All right. So the pasuk says by the goat v'iza oso, that he will sprinkle it, the blood it. Oso is of course singular, one time. Ala kapores, on the kapores. V'lifnei kapores, as well as lifnei kapores, which was referring to the 7 below. L'manu kaima l'mayla b'sayir achas. So we learn out that by the goat, you sprinkle it once above, right? It says, Visa oso al akaporis. It is one time on the kaporis above. Givaldik. Lemata b'sari en yodea kama. However, it doesn't say how many times you sprinkle the blood below by the goat. So now the Gemara tries to figure it out. Areni done? Well, I'll argue. Nemrudam lemata b'par, nemrudam lemata b'sayir. Well, it says that you sprinkle the blood below by the cow, and it says that you sprinkle the blood below by the goat. Malamata b'par sheva, just like when it comes to the cow, it's explicit that the below is 7 times. Aflamata b'sayir sheva. So also, the 7 below by the goat is going to be 7 times. Alright, there you go. But the Gemara says, wait, not so fast, because maybe I'll actually make the following argument, which is, Nemrudam l'mayla b'sayir, v'nemrudam l'mata b'sayir. 1 second, it says blood above by the goat, and blood below by the goat. Maybe rather than comparing the goat to the cow, to say that just like the cow below is 7, also the goat below is 7, why don't I compare the goat to itself? And say, well, I know that the goat above is 1, so maybe the goat below is also 1. So then the Gemara says, all right, well then near the midoma. Well, we're going to have to figure out which one is the better comparison. Done in mata mi mata vein done in mata mi lamala. So the Gemara says, well, I'd prefer to learn out below from below rather than below from above, right? Meaning, if I have the choice to learn out the 7 below of the goat from the 7 below of the cow, or to learn the 7 below of the goat from the 1 above of the goat, I'd rather learn out below from below rather than below from above. Adrabah, the Gemara says, no. Done gufa mi gufo, vein done gufa mi alma. The Gemara says, wait, but 1 second. I'd rather compare apples to apples than apples to oranges. I'd rather compare a goat to a goat and say that just like above by the goat is 1, so below by the goat is 1, rather than comparing a goat to a cow to say that, well, the below of the goat is 7 because the below of the cow is 7. I'd rather compare goats to goats rather than goats to cows. Talmud Lomar, the Gemara says, so what do we do? Ve'asa es damo kasher asa l'dam apar, shein Talmud Lomar kasher asa. The Gemara says, well, let's not forget. The pasuk by the goat says, Ve'asa es damo kasher asa l'dam apar, that you will do with the blood of the goat like you do with the blood of the cow. That she'ein Talmud Lomar kasher asa. We don't need it to say that, because I have all the information that I need. If I were to leave out the fact that we do with the goat like we do with the cow, I would say, okay, it says that you sprinkle the blood by the goat, above, below, maybe then we'll compare the above to the below, whatever it is. But then there's this additional pasuk that's explicitly comparing the goat to the cow. Why? How come we're explicitly saying that we compare the goat to the cow? It says that sheyiyu kol asiyos of shavos, to say that the blood of the goat and the cow need to be done exactly alike. And therefore, just like the 7 below of the cow is 7, so also the below by the goat is 7. Givaldik. Lamadnu kama lemata bepar uvisayir sheva. Okay, so we learned that how many sprinklings do you do below by the cow? 7. It says that explicitly in the pasuk. And we learned out the below by the goat from there, which is also 7. L'mayla b'par yodea kama. Says the Gemara, but I don't l'maysa know how many times I have to sprinkle the blood above by the cow. It doesn't say it explicitly. Already done. The Gemara says, well, let me try to make the following argument, which is nemudamim l'mayla b'soyer v'nemudamim l'mayla b'par. Well, it says blood above by the goat, and it says blood above by the cow. Just like the once above by the goat, it's explicit, it's clear that it's 1, because it says Vehiza oso is singular. So therefore also the sprinkling above by the cow, the maise is also going to be 1. But maybe I can make the following suggestion, which is it says blood below by the cow and blood above by the cow. Just like the 7 below by the cow are 7, so maybe also the above by the cow are 7. So what do? Do we compare the cow to the goat to say that just like by the goat above it's 1, by the cow above it's 1? Or do we compare the cow to itself and say that just like by the cow below is 7? I don't know what I said just like by the goat above it's 1, by the cow above it's 1? Or do we say that by the cow below it's 7, so by the cow above it's also 7? Near the midoma. So the Gemara says, well, let's see what makes the better comparison. Done in Maila mimaila and done in Maila mimato. The Gemara says, well, let's learn out above from above. Let's learn out the 1 above by the goat to teach us that it's 1 above by the cow. Right? And we don't learn out the 1 above from the cow from the 7 below of the cow. Adrabah, done guf migufa, done guf miyama. Rather, I'll say, wait, let's learn out cows from cows. Don't learn out cows from goats. Talmud Lomar ve'asa es damo kasher asa right? The pasuk says that you will do the blood of the goat like the cow. It doesn't need to say that. How come it does say it? Shiu kol asiyos of shavos, to teach us that all of the activities of the cow and the goat need to be equivalent. Shem shelamata b'par sheva kach lamata b'soyer sheva, just like the below of the cow is 7, so also the below of the goat is 7. And just like above by the goat is taka 1, so also above by the cow is going to be 1. And there you go. So mamish, all the blood of the cow and the goat are the same. 1 above, 7 below. They do not actually touch the Aron Givaldig. Going weiter. The Mishnah had said, Achas, achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim. Come on. Everybody, that's familiar, right? Of course, come on. That's like the Yom Kippur. That's like Yom Kippur, right? The avoda in the Chazar Sashas of Musaf, v'kachaya Omer, and then everybody bows down. It's a whole thing. Achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, achas v'shalosh, etc. Tanu Rabbanan the Rabbi started achas v'achas. So achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, achas v'shalosh, achas v'arba, achas v'chomish, achas v'sheis, achas v'sheva, divrei Reb Meir. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, achas v'achas shtayim v'achas shalosh v'achas arba v'achas chomish v'achas sheish v'achas sheva v'achas. You guys hear that? That according to Reb Meir, it's like what we say, right? Achas v'shtayim, achas v'shalosh, etc. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's the opposite. It's shtayim v'achas, shalosh v'achas, arba v'achas. And says the Gemara below plige. Interesting answer. Marki asrei, marki asrei. So interesting answer. That they're not arguing, they're each just doing like the minig was where they're from. You know, I was learning with my friend Reb Josh Weinberg on Shabbos, and we were saying it's like in the United States we say 9th grade. I believe in Canada they say grade 9. You know, which do you do first? Or like in America you do the month, right? This is like classic, right? America is like month, day, year, but like everybody else it's like day, month, year, lemaisa. So that's a machlokas. That according to Reb Meir, so he would be like a 21 person as opposed to 1 and 20. So he would say 21. First you do the general one and then you do the specific. And therefore over here it's achas v'shtayim. The specific comes after, right? Achas v'shtayim, achas v'shalosh, achas v'chomesh. But just like 21, 22, 23, the specific one comes second. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda would be 1 and 20, 2 and 20, 3 and 20. And therefore, he does the specific first, right? Achas v'achas, shtayim v'achas, shalosh v'achas. Got it? Good. Let's go weiter. Marki asrei, marki asrei. And the Gemara points out, but Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda do agree that you have to include the first one with all the other ones, right? It's not just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's 1, 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, you know, in whatever order it is, but you're always going back to 1. My time, how come? Rabbi Elazar Amar Shelo Yate Ba'azos. Rabbi Elazar says so that you pay attention and don't make a mistake. If you keep on, you know, if you just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and just kind of rush through it, so you may make a mistake. Whereas if you take a second to contemplate 1 and 2, 1 and 3, 1 and 4, it'll give you a little more space and you'll do everything properly. Rabbi Yochanan Amar says, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kra. He says, look, the pasuk says, V'lifnei hakaparos yazeh. Sheitam Elomar yazeh. It says that in front of the kaparos he will sprinkle. It doesn't have to say that he'll sprinkle. Right? If you look at the pasuk, it says, V'lochach midam apar v'yiza be'etzbo al pnei hakaparos keid milifnei hakaparos. You could skip the next word yazeh. Just say, V'lifnei hakaparos sheva paimim. How come it says yazeh? Matam Elomar yazeh. Limit al azar rishona shetzricha minyanim kol achas v'achas. So the extra word yazeh, which doesn't need it because it already said earlier in the pasuk sprinkle. So how come it says sprinkle a second time? To teach us that the first sprinkling needs to be counted with all of them. My benai, what's the nafkamina? Ke benai lo manav lo ta. So what's the nafkamina between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan? The nafkamina is that according to Rabbi Yochanan, he learns that from a pasuk. You have to include achas v'achas, achas v'shtayim, etc. And if you don't, it's a problem. The pasuk says you have to. According to Rabbi Elazar, it says no. The point is that you don't make a mistake. If you can make it, you know, if he doesn't count like that, and he doesn't, you know, and everything is cool, does everything properly, give all it. Says the Gemara, Yatzavinicho Akan Azov Shebeheichel. So the Mishnah had said that after the Kohen Gadol sprinkles the blood of the cow, he takes it and he puts it down on a kind of I don't know if platform is the right word, but on resting, some kind of place to put it down in the heichel. Tanan Hasam, we learn in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda lo hayu shofaros l'kinei chova mepnei ta'aruvos. Ooh, wah! This is the Gemara that we saw in Masechta Shkalim. I think L'maisa Masechta Shkalim it might have been complicated, probably because everything in Shkalim was complicated. But over here it's not so complicated, even though it might be the same exact thing, just because it's easier to understand in Bavli. So it says Rabbi Yehuda that, remember there were all these pushkas on Har HaBayis, there were all these collection boxes. So there were collection boxes for birds, right? Yeah, people bring bird offerings. So there were collection boxes for the birds. Says Rabbi Yehuda that none of those collection boxes for the birds were for obligatory bird offerings, such as Zav, Zava, Yoledes. There were no collection boxes for obligatory offerings. Only for voluntary offerings. That if you want to bring 2 birds as a korban, so leave your money in the box and the Kohanim will offer a korban for you. But not obligatory korbans. So Rabbi Yehuda says because he's concerned that they'll get mixed together. What are we concerned about getting mixed together? There aren't a collection boxes for obligatory bird offerings because they might get mixed up. Mixed up with what? Rav Yosef and Bnei Ta'aroves Chova B'Nedava. So if Yosef says, well, we're concerned that if you have a box for the obligatory bird offerings and a box for the voluntary bird offerings, they might somehow end up getting mixed together. And that's a problem because obligatory bird offerings is 1 chatas and 1 ola, whereas voluntary bird offerings are 2 olas and they're offered differently, and therefore it creates a mess. So therefore, to avoid a mess, we just say no obligatory offerings. The boxes are only for voluntary offerings. Amar le'Abaye. Abaye says to Rav Yosef, V'naivid trei, how about this? Make 2 separate boxes. V'nichtov alayu edechova v'nedava. No, gewaltige answer, right? Abaye says, just label it. I think that's a geschmacke answer. Just be clear. And then you don't have to worry about mistakes. Rabbi Yehuda leis leksiva. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of writing, meaning that he doesn't feel that writing is quite enough. That you can label it and people still might make mistakes. They won't pay attention, whatever it is. You can't just assume that because you wrote something on a label, then everything is right. Things could still go wrong. And therefore, if we just say no obligatory offerings, low plug, then there's no mistakes that are going to be made. It's not as we learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, lo hayasham ela ken echad bavad. That Rabbi Yehuda had said, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion in our Mishnah here in Masechta Yoma is that, right, whereas the Chachamim said, when he was done with the blood of the goat, he would take the blood of the goat and put it down on a second platform in the Heichal, and then he would go and take the blood of the cow from the first one and sprinkle it on the kaporis. Rabbi Yehuda says no, there was only 1 platform, and therefore he would first pick up the blood of the cow and then put down the blood of the goat on the same platform. Trey, my time alone. Now according to Rabbi Yehuda, how come there was only 1 platform? Why couldn't there be 2? Well, because then you might, if there are 2, you might mix them up. You might mix up the blood of the goat and of the cow. But 1 second, Rabbi Yehuda, why don't you just have 2 platforms and just write which one's for the cow, which one's for the goat, and nobody will make a mistake? El Rabbi Yehuda leis leiksiva. Rather, it must be that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't hold of writing, he doesn't hold that labeling is enough to prevent mistakes, and that is why Rabbi Yehuda says there was only 1 platform in the Heichal, and that is, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of writing. Writing is not enough. You can't assume that just because you wrote something down, then people aren't going to make mistakes, and therefore the same applies to the boxes for the birds. Rabbi Yehuda feels that it would not be enough, it would not suffice to have two boxes, one that's labeled obligatory, one that's labeled voluntary, because people could still make mistakes, and therefore there was no box for obligatory offerings, only for voluntary offerings. Meisvei, we have, however, a kasha from a Mishnah in Shkalim, Shlosh Esrei Shofaru Sayu B'Mikdash. There were 13 of these collection boxes in the Beis HaMikdash. And the boxes were labeled. What were they labeled? Well, one of them said the new shekels, one of them said the old shekels, the kinin, the goes le'ola, and the Gemara is going to explain what this is. The different birds, so that's already 4. The eitzim ulevona v'zav l'chapores, and then there was a collection box for wood, for frankincense, for gold, for klei sharis. That's already 7. V'shisha l'nedava, and another 6 for the Ketzim Mizbeach. So now we're up to 13. Tiklin chadtin elu shkalim shel kol shana v'shana. The box for the new shekels were for the shekel donations that they would collect every year. Tiklin atikin mishlo shekel ishtakin yishkol l'shana haba. The old coins are for somebody who didn't chaparain last year, so if he brings it this year, so he puts it in the old coin collection box. Kinin ein torin goes le'ole in b'nei Yona. Kinin is referring to turtle doves. The goes le'ole is referring to the regular doves. V'chulan olis to Rabbi Yehuda, and they're all olas, right? The kinin, the goes the olas, they're all olas because according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't bring obligatory. There's no box for obligatory bird offerings, only for voluntary bird offerings, and therefore they're all olas because obligatory bird offerings has one chatas and one ola. Voluntary are all olas. So what do we see? Lemaise, we see that Mishnah in Shkalim is Rabbi Yehuda, and he's saying v'chasuv aleim. Etc. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda does l'maisa hold of labeling. So we see he does hold of labeling. And therefore to tie it back into our case, how come we don't just label the boxes, one for the obligatory offering, one for the voluntary offering, and then just assume that everybody did it right? We see that he labels the different boxes. Because Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came, he said, "Ma'arava that they say in Eretz Yisrael, Gezer mishum chata shemesu ba'ileh." That Rabbi Yehuda, while labeling is all fine and good, Rabbi Yehuda is concerned what happens if you have a box for obligatory offerings, and people are putting their money in, and lots of people are putting their money in. One of these birds is a chatas, one of these birds is an ola, and then what happens if one of the people who put their money in, pashik yishturbin? He died. So now, you have a bird in there that's going to be for a korban chatas, but the owner is dead. Korban chatas shemesu ba'ileh is lemisa azla. There's nothing you can do with it. It just has to die. And it basically creates a mess for all of the chatases that are in there because one of them is a chatas shemesu ba'ileh. But fact Gemara, but is that really a concern? Are we really concerned that somebody's going to drop dead? We learned in the Mishnah, if a fellow sends a korban chatas from outside of Israel, we can offer it for him, and we assume that he's still alive. So we assume that people are still alive, and therefore we can allow everybody. If Rabbi Yehuda is cool with labeling, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, why don't we just label one of the boxes for obligatory bird offerings, one for voluntary bird offerings? The people will put their money in the right box, and we don't have to be concerned about somebody dying and having a chatas shemesu ba'ileh, because apparently that's not a concern. So the Gemara says, no, we're concerned about a situation where we know with certainty that the owner of the korban died. That if you have a whole bunch of people putting money into this box for the obligatory offerings, and then we know one person died. Fact, one person died. We don't know which money is his. And it messes it up for everybody. And in that case, it's not a question of maybe he died, he for sure died, and therefore he's for sure messing it up. And therefore Rabbi Yehuda says, no obligatory box, collection box, because what happens in the case where somebody dies and ruins it for everybody? V'nivra ba'azuzeh v'nishdei b'maya. Behanach nishtru. In fact, the Gemara, why don't you just take 4 zuz, which is the equivalent of a bird, right? So meaning if you have this box and a whole bunch of people put money in the box for their obligatory offerings, one person we know died. So therefore there's some money in there, there's 4 zuz in there that need to be thrown away. So do just that. Go into the box, take 4 zuz. That was for Reuven who passed away. Throw it in the garbage. And then all the remaining ones are usable. So Rabbi Yehuda leis lebreira. So the Gemara answers, well, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a breira. We've learned about breira a number of times. Photoshopping, reality, going back and saying that Memela, the 4 coins that we took out just now, retroactively were the 4 coins that belonged to Reuven who died, and all the rest of the coins in there belonged to everybody else, and we could offer their chatases for them. But Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of that. You don't just go back and change reality. Therefore, there's no guarantee that the 4 that you took out actually belonged to Reuven who passed away, and therefore that wouldn't work. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says just avoid the whole situation. Don't have a collection box for the obligatory offerings. Chaver, we're going to end over here. I'm going to stop over here because then this continues on to Daf Nun Vav, the proof for why Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold a breira. Chaver, that was Daf Nun Hey, Daf 55 of Masechta Yoma. The first part of the Daf discussed the sprinkling of the blood of the goat and of the cow. We said that they are exactly the same, which means that you sprinkle the blood once above, 7 below, by the cow, by the goat, and they don't actually touch the aron, rather they fall on the ground before the aron. We discussed how to count, how would the Kohen Gadol count when he was sprinkling. So we saw that according to a Mary, he would sprinkle, right? Achaz v'achaz, achaz v'sh. I don't know what I just said, but he would count achaz v'achaz, achaz v'shtayim, achaz v'shalosh, etc. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be right achaz v'achaz, shtayim v'achaz, shalosh v'achaz, arba v'achaz, and it was just based on the minig, how they would count in their place. We saw machlokas between, where they were from. We saw machlokas between Rabbi Lazar and Rabbi Yochanan for how come he has to count. Rabbi Lazar says that he counts so that he'll have he'll be able to focus better. And that's why he definitely counts achaz v'achaz, achaz v'shtayim, that the extra time that it takes to count rather than just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, will allow him to have better intention. Rabbi Yochanan says it's actually exeris hakasu, right? Because the pasuk says, it says the word yaza an extra time to teach that Itaka has to include that in his counting, the extra sprinkle in his counting. And therefore the nafkamina is, of course, if he didn't include it, Rabbi Yochanan would say that objectively it's a problem. Rabbi Lazar would say as long as he didn't mess up, it's okay. We then saw that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there was no collection box in the Beis HaMikdash for obligatory bird offerings, and the question is why? According to Rav Yosef, it's because if you have obligatory bird offerings, they might get mixed together with the voluntary bird offerings, and that would be a problem. Abai suggests, why doesn't he just label the boxes? Initially we wanted to say that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that labeling is a good enough solution, but then we proved that actually according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can label boxes. So if that's the case, then how come we don't just label the boxes for the Ola and for the Nidava? So we said ultimately it's because we're concerned that, well, in the event that somebody who put money in the box dies, he's basically going to ruin it for everybody, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says don't do it. Now, to tie it into the Kohen Gadol and the Beis HaMikdash, well, how Rabbi Yehuda says that there was only one platform because we don't want the Kohen Gadol to make a mistake. But why not just have 2 platforms and label them? Rabbi Yehuda seems to be okay with labeling. We haven't answered that question yet. Chaver, that was Daf Nun Hey Masechta Yoma. I hope you enjoyed it. Cheers.